Hello, good evening. I'm Barry Edelstein, Erna Fincy Viterbi, Artistic Director of the Old Globe in San Diego, California. And I'm very delighted to be with you for the 6th program in our series, Thinking Shakespeare Live, the Sonnets. The 6th program. We started the first one on March 31st of this year, and now it's March 927th, and I'm back to talk about Shakespeare's sonnets. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you live from World Headquarters in Exile of the Old Globe, also known as my dining room, and to talk about some absolutely beautiful poetry and some big ideas and about the work of William Shakespeare and the work of the Old Globe. I'd like to, however, before we jump into the sonnets, share with you a couple of personal reflections on an extraordinary turbulent time in the life of the Old Globe and in the life of America. And I hope you'll bear with me if I speak to you about what our institution is thinking and what I'm thinking as the head of a cultural organization as large and influential as the Old Globe. Tonight's program and some work that we did digitally earlier today brings the Globe back online after a one-week hiatus. We chose to take a period of reflection and mourning following an extraordinary week in the life of our country, a terrible period in the life of our country, not just the COVID-19 pandemic, but the murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police, and the enormous uprising that's been filling the streets of cities all across America with the banner Black Lives Matter and with activists who want to see reform and change and want to end this systemic racism that's been riving our country. As the head of an arts institution, I'm asking myself, what can I do? What can the Old Globe do to make a difference? How can we dismantle these systems of racism, not just in the American theater, but in the larger community? How can we make change? How can we eradicate racism? How can we amplify voices of the Black community and other communities of color that we should be hearing more from that aren't center stage in our organization? What can we be doing with all the structures in our operation from top to bottom? We, like so many other arts institutions, have put out earnest statements, just as I'm speaking to you earnestly now, but we know that that's not enough, that action is required, that we're going to be held accountable for what we do now and for the change that we make. The community is looking to us for leadership. Black artists, our Black staff members, and all people of conscience are demanding of this institution and every American institution real change. We've taken some steps. Our arts engagement team convened a couple of dozen members of the Black theater community here in San Diego for a very preliminary discussion, the first of what we know will be many, in which we simply listened and asked, what can the Old Globe do? What resources can we share? What changes can we make? What programming can we adjust? What hiring practices can we examine in response to this terrible crisis? Our artistic team, our arts engagement team, our senior leadership team and departments of the institution wide are asking this question as well. We have so much to do, and I wish I could tell you right now exactly what our action plan is going to be. We will publish it, and soon. But I do know it's going to be characterized by reflection and by listening and by a commitment, by conversations, by communications, by real promises. And we urge you to communicate with us if you have ideas. You can reach me at my email, hibarry@theoldglobe.org, which I'll show you again later, here on Facebook Live. We want to be held to account. We want to make change. We want to be part of modeling an America that we all want to live in, to repair past wrongs and to set a more just, equitable, and, if I may say, faithful course going forward. So thank you for letting me share that with you. It's a time of great pain in our organization and in my heart. And I'm speaking to you as clearly and frankly as I can about how the globe wants to be part of change. Now, tonight I'm going to be talking about Shakespeare, of all things. I mean, the ultimate dead white male. We had some conversations on the staff of the Old Globe about whether I should do this tonight, whether Shakespeare's the right thing to be talking about now. But in my reflections on this, I realized, there are a couple thousand people out there who've come to look forward to these programs. And Shakespeare himself has an awful lot of wisdom to share with us. And so maybe we should listen and see what, if anything, he had to say. And in that regard, I want to share another personal experience, if I may. A couple days ago, I was very honored to give the commencement address at the Francis Parker School here in San Diego. It's a wonderful institution. The high school graduating class of 2020 couldn't have their commencement in person because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and so they had it at a drive-in movie theater. There you see a picture of it. That's just outside Petco Park where the San Diego Padres play, and they set up a couple of jumbotrons, and little peanut on the right is me standing on a stage, and then a TV screen making me a little bit bigger. And I spoke to about 300 cars full of the graduating class of Parker seniors and their families and the staff and teachers of the school. And I talked a little bit about Shakespeare, about maybe what Shakespeare might help us think about right now. And what I talked about was this, which is the first folio of William Shakespeare. I began our Sonnets program back in March talking about this book. This is a volume that was published in 1623, a huge year in world civilization because two actors in Shakespeare's company had succeeded in gathering all 36 of his plays and publishing them for the first time. There you see Mr. William Shakespeare's Comedies, Histories, and Tragedies. 18 of Shakespeare's plays had been published during his lifetime. He died in 1616, 7 years before this book was published. 18 of his plays were known. The other 18 had not yet been published, and if it weren't for this book, we would not have them. Masterpieces like Julius Caesar, As You Like It, The Winter's Tale, Twelfth Night. This book gathers all 36 plays, and it's the book that gave us Shakespeare. The Shakespeare we revere, the Shakespeare we treasure, is collected in this volume for the very first time. Now, 1623, it took a long time to make a book back then. There were only about 250 copies of the book published when it was first put out. You have to set it up a page at a time. There are 900 pages. You have to take each letter, the thousands of letters on each page, and set it up in a little frame. It's called compositing. You set it up backwards and upside down until you have the entire page in a frame. Then you smear it with ink, put some paper, and press it down, and you have a page of a book. Here's a woodcut of a printing house in Shakespeare's period. Over there on the left, you see the guy setting up the letters of the pages and their supervisor looking on. In the back, in the center, you see a guy with two sort of weird cushions putting ink on a plate. And then on the right, there's a big guy pulling a lever. And what he's doing is putting the printing press down, pressing a page. So he has to do that 250 times for each page. And then that frame of letters is dismantled and another page is put together and he presses another 250 copies. And it took over a year to manufacture 900 copies of the first folio. But that's not all the time it took because, as I said, 18 plays had already been published. So Shakespeare's company had to go find the rights to those 18 plays and get legal permission to publish them again. That took time. Plus, they had to find the other 18 plays that had not been published in manuscript. Where? In people's closets, in boxes, in storage rooms. They had to track down actors who might have known where the manuscripts of these plays were. That process took almost 3 years. So it was about a 4-year period, 3.5, 4-year period, from the time Shakespeare's company had the idea to make this book to publishing it in 1623. Okay, so 1623 minus 3.5 years, 4 years. You're in early 1620, late 1619. What happened then that made Shakespeare's company want to publish these 36 plays? Well, the answer is a pandemic. The bubonic plague broke out frequently during Shakespeare's period. And when it did, Shakespeare's theater company ran out of money because the only income that they had was selling tickets. They had some royal patronage, some aristocratic patronage, but basically, if their theater was closed, they weren't selling tickets. And when the pandemic broke out, the theater was closed, just like today, because nobody then knew about the germ theory of disease or knew about viruses or bacteria, but they knew that if a lot of people came together in a tightly packed space, sickness would spread. So the authorities shut the theaters down when the plague broke out. And Shakespeare's company was in trouble because they had no income and they had to do things. So they pivoted. They toured to healthy cities around England and internationally. We know they were a big success in Germany. And they also turned to publishing. They thought we can sell Shakespeare's plays in a volume, and that will give us the cash that we need to get through this period of the theater being closed. To put that another way, we have Shakespeare's 36 plays in the form that we know and revere because of an entrepreneurial response to pandemic. A pandemic made Shakespeare's theater company scramble. And the end result was that it bequeathed to us something that changed the course of human civilization. Crises have a way of doing that. Crises forge new things. Our study of Shakespeare tells us that when a pandemic breaks out, when a national emergency explodes, change can happen. And I know that right now, in the middle of the twin crises that we're in, I can look to Shakespeare and understand that even as I speak this, something new is happening. Someone, somewhere, is making a piece of art, is preparing to publish something. Someone is thinking about new forms that can attack this entrenched racism that's caused so much harm. And I choose to turn to Shakespeare in this moment so that I can understand, just as he went through a serious emergency that threatened the very form that he had devoted his life to, and survived and thrived, and his company made something new and gave to world culture something massive and significant, so that might happen again. And I draw solace. I let Shakespeare inspire me to know that there are paths forward out of crisis and out of emergency through creativity. Now, that first folio has a lot of material in it other than Shakespeare. Again, I started my talk about the sonnets months ago by talking about a letter that the two actors who put the volume together wrote to the readers. There's that famous portrait of Shakespeare. That's in the first folio. There's also a poem. It's called To the Memory of My Beloved, the author, Mr. William Shakespeare, and What He Hath Left Us. And there on the right, you can see it's signed by Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson, there he is, was one of Shakespeare's most prominent contemporaries, the first poet laureate of Britain. He was a playwright, a poet. He was the son of a bricklayer, a working class guy who scratched his way up and became a massively important man of letters. And he was a rival of Shakespeare. They had a bit of a competition going, and Jonson even knew during his lifetime that Shakespeare would cast a shadow over him. But 7 years after his death, he wrote a really beautiful poem to his old friend, and it has a famous line in it that goes like this: "Triumph, my Britain, thou hast one to show, to whom all scenes of Europe homage owe. He was not of an age, but for all time." He was not of an age, but for all time. That's an extraordinary thing to say about Shakespeare. He doesn't just belong to 1623. He doesn't just belong to the years that he was alive, but he belonged to all time. And Jonson knew it then. And we know it because when we go out and look at a beautiful moon at night, we hear Romeo talking about the moon, and we say, yeah, he was not of an age, but he was for all time. When we look at our children and love them, we think of the parents and children in Shakespeare's plays and the glorious things they say about each other, and we say, yeah, there's a direct line connecting his time to ours. When in the spring the daffodils bloom and there's this magic carpet of yellow on our lawn that wasn't there the night before, we feel wonder and we break out into song, just like Shakespeare did in a play called The Winter's Tale, where he sings a song about daffodils blooming in the spring. So yeah, he was not of an age, but for all time. There's a line that connects 400 years ago to today, and it makes us feel good about the idea of human continuity. But that's not all there is in Shakespeare. There's also darkness. There's misogyny. There's homophobia. There's class-based discrimination. And there's racism in Othello, in Titus Andronicus, in The Merchant of Venice. And we have to ask, was he for all time in that sense too? Sometimes I talk to my students and I boggle at the fact that Shakespeare seems to survive time in that way, but there's a flip side to that. Shakespeare lived not in a republic like ours, but in a monarchy without notions of human rights. Shakespeare lived in a state that was really sort of an espionage state, a police state, some would say a terror state, where there was a state apparatus that tracked citizens down. Political rivals could be jailed without charge. There was torture. There was political execution. There were ideas about science and the supernatural that look positively primitive to us now. So sometimes I feel that the miracle of Shakespeare is not that he reached across the centuries, but given how different his universe was from ours, the miracle is that we can make any sense of him at all. And so to return to where I began, I want to offer you that thought. One way to look at Shakespeare is to find things in him that we repudiate today, and to say our world has progressed over 400 years. We believe things today about the nature of human beings that are much more open and progressive than the things that Shakespeare believed in his day. And sometimes we look at Shakespeare's beliefs from 400 years ago and we say, oh my God, we have not progressed very much at all. And so I proffer that other use of Shakespeare. Not only does he teach us that out of pandemic grows creativity, but he also functions for us as a touchstone, if I may use the name of a character in one of his plays, by which we can measure ourselves. Have we progressed over 400 years, or have we not? What more must we do in the continuing enterprise of perfecting human society? Can Shakespeare be our measure and encourage us to make change? At the moment, I find myself thinking that yes, he can. I'm going to attempt a transition now. Thank you for allowing me to share those thoughts with you. I began thinking about what I would present to you on June 9th, quite some time ago. And so I bring to you some thoughts about June. That's the month that we're in. Shakespeare understood then what we understand about June. It is the month of weddings. And that is what I'd like to spend the time that we have tonight talking about. Shakespeare as the bard and poet of the nuptial union. I wrote a book some time ago called Bardisms, Shakespeare for All Occasions, in which I collected together Shakespeare's musings about all sorts of stuff. What happens if somebody gets a promotion? What happens if you lose something? What happens if you get jealous? And what about a wedding? People are always calling me and saying, hey, Barry, I'm going to a wedding. Somebody's asked me to do a reading. Do you have any Shakespeare you can recommend? And I want to take you through a couple of ideas about that. That's a play called Cymbeline. And there's this beautiful quote about weddings in it, when a parent says to his children about to be married, the benediction of these covering heavens fall on their heads like dew, for they are worthy to inlay heaven with stars. A beautiful blessing to say to a couple about to get married. I hope that the benediction of the heavens falls on their heads like morning dew, because they are like stars in the firmament. Here's one from a play called The Tempest, in which a couple's about to get married, and their father, who's a magician, sets up a little entertainment for them. His name is Prospero, the grand wizard of this island. And he brings out Juno, the goddess, the queen of the gods, and also Ceres, the goddess of agriculture. And he puts on a little play to entertain his daughter and future son-in-law as they are about to get married. And he enchants the spirits of his island to come and do a little show for these two people. And Juno says to the couple, honor, riches, marriage blessing, long continuance and increasing, hourly joys be still upon you. Juno sings her blessings on you. And series continues, earth's increase, foison, plenty. Foison's an old word for harvest. Earth's increase, foison, plenty. Barns and garners never empty. A garner is a granary. Barns and garners never empty. Vines and clustering branches growing. Plants with goodly burden bowing. Spring, come to you at the farthest in the very end of harvest. I hope it's spring as soon as harvest is over. Scarcity and want shall shun you. Ceres' blessing so is on you. So these two goddesses come down to this couple about to be married, and they bless them in the language of abundance, in the language of the harvest, in the language of the fertility of nature, with a little glance toward what the future of the couple might be. And it's a wonderful wedding benediction to a beautiful young couple about to embark on their adventure together. There's Juno and Ceres in a production that I directed of The Tempest at the Walt Disney Concert Hall in LA a couple of years ago. At the end of the wedding party, somebody comes up and As You Like It and says, now that everybody's married, we're going to have some music. Meantime, forget this new fallen dignity and fall into our rustic revelry. Play music, and you brides and bridegrooms all with measures heaped in joy to the measures fall. So when you're at the wedding reception and it's time to strike up the band, there's some Shakespeare for you from As You Like It. There's some wedding vows that Shakespeare offers us. If you place your ring on your partner's finger and say, when this ring parts from this finger, then parts life from hence. There's my ring. When this ring parts from my finger, then parts life from hence. That's from The Merchant of Venice. From As You Like It, this beautiful vow, to you I give myself, for I am yours. To you I give myself, for I am yours. What a beautiful thing to say to the person that you're marrying. Here's another one from As You Like It. My affection hath an unknown bottom, like the Bay of Portugal. I read that once at a friend's wedding. In Shakespeare's day, it was believed that the Bay of Portugal was the deepest body of water on planet Earth. Today we know it's the Marianas Trench off of the Philippines. But, my affection hath an unknown bottom. Like the Marianas Trench somehow isn't as euphonious as the Bay of Portugal. Isn't that a great way to tell someone that you love them endlessly? My affection hath an unknown bottom, like the Bay of Portugal. Fantastic image. And then Juliet, famously, maybe the greatest love vow in all of Shakespeare. My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love as deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite. Just a gorgeous thing to say. The more of myself I give away, the richer I feel, because the love I have for you and the way it fills me is infinite. So there's some wedding vows from the plays of William Shakespeare. But the granddaddy of all wedding speeches is to be found there in Shakespeare's sonnets. And so here we are. I have finally wound my way around to tonight's subject. There is a masterpiece, the greatest wedding poem of them all, here published in 1609 in the first volume of William Shakespeare's Sonnets. Now, quick reminder, that volume had in it 154 poems, all about love and jealousy and romance and sex, all about time and its power to corrode and lead us on a one-way street toward death, and how life just sort of flashes by, but also how creativity and art and poetry can fight the depredations of time and confer a kind of permanence on human life. Each of Shakespeare's sonnets has 14 lines organized into groups, 3 quatrains, a quatrain being a set of 4, followed by a couplet, 3 quatrains and a couplet. 3 times 4 is 12, plus 2, 14. There's a rhyme scheme in Shakespeare's sonnets. Here's the rhymes from the sonnet that we looked at last time here. Being year seen everywhere, time increase, prime decease, me fruit thee mute, cheer near. So the rhymes alternate. The last word in each quatrain alternates with the next last word in the line, and they rhyme. And there's the scheme, A, B, A, B, that is the first and third lines, and the second and fourth line of each quatrain rhyme, and then the couplet rhymes. So that's the rhyme scheme. We're going to see that in tonight's sonnet. The sonnets are written in iambic pentameter, which I'm going to talk about in a little more detail after we work our way through tonight's poem. But an iamb is 2 syllables. It goes de-dump. You put 5 of them, penta, together, and you get de-dump, 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 also known as blank verse. Iambic pentameter is the poetic meter, the time signature, if you will, of Shakespeare's sonnets. Finally, in all of Shakespeare's sonnets, and tonight is a little strange in this regard, there's a volta or a turn. The sonnet makes a case, tells a story, and then, usually at the beginning of line 9, although not tonight, the story takes a turn. You know, the one I've been illustrating this point with is, I'm really tired of being cooped up in my house, but I've really enjoyed the time I've had with my family, and that's the volta, comes at but. I'm tired of being cooped up in my house, but I've enjoyed that time with my family. So there's a turn in all of Shakespeare's sonnets. And so we come to the great wedding poem of Shakespeare, Sonnet 116. You're going to recognize it the minute I start to read it. It's famous. You may have actually said it at a wedding once or heard it read at your own. If you're ever asked to do it again, thanks to tonight, I'm going to do it like a professional. Okay, Sonnet 116 by William Shakespeare. As always, I'm going to go through it one line at a time and paraphrase it so that we can all understand what's being said. Then I'll talk about the language in a little more detail, and then it is your turn. Okay. Let me not to the marriage of true minds. So let me not to the marriage of true minds meaning perfectly compatible psyches, right? Minds that are perfectly matched, characters that are just right for each other. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Let there not be any impediment to the marriage of true minds. In the Book of Common Prayer, in Shakespeare's period, there was that piece of the wedding ceremony where the officiant would ask, if anyone here assembled knows any impediment to this union, let him or her speak it now. We get that in weddings today. Well, he's saying, let me not admit an impediment. I hope tonight in this marriage, nobody's going to stand up and say, I know why they shouldn't get married. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds. Love isn't really love. If it changes when something changes, right? Love is constant. That's the theme of this sonnet. Love is constant. It doesn't just change when something changes, right? If something happens in the life of our partner, we don't just bail. We go with that change. I got an email from someone watching our program, so beautiful, asked me if I would present this sonnet because they had a transgender child. And when that child changed gender, they thought as parents, love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds. So beautiful to use Shakespeare to help understand a life event like that. Love is constant. Love doesn't change just because circumstances change. Or bend with the remover to remove. Love doesn't alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Such an interesting turn of phrase. Or bends with the remover to remove. What remover? Anybody who moves around, anybody who changes something. And Shakespeare has to have a little fun, carry the idea of the remover. What is that? Is that like a guy who comes over to clear your house? It could mean many, many different things. Somebody who damages something, somebody who shifts something, somebody who purposely makes a change. But love is not love if it bends with the remover to remove. So witty to say that, or bends with the remover to remove. No, love doesn't do that. Love is constant. Second quatrain. Oh, no. It is an ever-fixed mark. I'll talk later about why it's fixed, but mark, a landmark, an ever-fixed mark. Actually, technically, Shakespeare is referring to a sea mark, which is a beacon or a buoy on land that ships can navigate by. It is an ever-fixed mark, like a lighthouse or something like that, or maybe just a natural structure that seamen can see on the shore and can use to figure out where they are. It is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. That sea mark is up high and it's looking on storms, but it never gets shaken. Love is an ever-fixed mark that can see a storm, but is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark. A bark is a ship. We still use it when we get on a cruise ship today. We embark. A large vessel is a bark, right? And it's the North Star. Love is the North Star because remember, in Shakespeare's period, we don't have GPS. We're navigating by the stars. So love is the star that every wandering bark whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. The star, we can take its height, but we don't know its worth. So take its height. Here's an image of what that means. There's a guy using a quadrant as opposed to a sextant to take the height of a star, which is to calculate the angle of a star in the sky. So love is the star to every wandering bark, and we don't know what that star is worth, but we can measure it in the heavens. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. So love is not the dupe of time. Time can do a lot of things. It can damage a building. It can make us grow old, but it can't damage love, right? Even though rosy lips and cheeks, our beauty may fade, right? The beauty of a young person will within his bending sickle's compass come. So time carries a sickle like death, right? A big scythe. And when he swings it around, it describes a circle. And that's the bending sickle's compass. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks. There's alters again. So love isn't subject to things like weeks and hours, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. Doom there is judgment day, or maybe it's death. So love doesn't alter with time. Love doesn't alter with circumstances. Love doesn't alter with changes. Love doesn't alter with getting lost. Love is constant and stays that way till the end of time. And now we have a couplet. If this be error, and upon me proved, if this is wrong and you can prove it, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. Now that's a boast, right? If this is wrong and you can prove it, then I've never written a word and nobody's ever loved. And here we see Shakespeare playing with the sonnet form itself. He's written 154. We're at number 116. It's 1609. He's already written Hamlet and King Lear and Othello and Much Ado About Nothing and Henry V and Richard III and The Merchant of Venice and all his masterpieces. And here Shakespeare's being a braggart and making a boast. If I'm wrong and you can prove it, then I never wrote a word, which of course is impossible. So it's a little fun, twinkly little boast, little brag that Shakespeare is making. So this beautiful poem expresses a simple idea. Love is constant. Love doesn't change. Love that's between true minds lasts until the edge of time. And you know what? If that's wrong, then I ain't a writer. So that's kind of the volta there, and this sonnet happens at that if at line 13. Now here's a weird thing about this sonnet. There's its appearance in the 1609 quarto, and notice it's numbered number 119, not 116. Weird, just an error in the printing. You can see the next one under it is 117, but for some reason it was printed as number 119. And looking at the book reminds me of a story a long time ago. When I was a young guy with rosy lips and cheeks, I was directing a play at the Williamstown Theater Festival in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. It was a June day, summer theater festival, and I was on a lunch break from whatever play I was directing, and I was walking down the street in Williamstown, Spring Street, lovely little New England village, and I saw a young woman with a giant book on her lap sitting on a stoop in front of a store, and with a furrowed brow, and I could see her lips moving as she was looking in this gigantic book. And this was a time in my life before I met my beautiful wife, Hilit, and I was a young man. I saw a young woman reading a book, and I thought, I'm going to go over and say hello. And as I approached, I could see that it was a Shakespeare in her lap, and I thought, it's a June day in Williamstown. I'll bet that she's been asked to read this poem at somebody's wedding. And I went up to her and I said, excuse me, is that a Shakespeare? And she said, yeah. And I said, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. And I went through the poem just in time for her boyfriend to come over and give her an ice cream cone, and that was the end of that story. But I've always associated this poem with that weird moment in my youthful romantic life in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Like all of Shakespeare's material written in iambic pentameter, it's important to go through it one line at a time, because at the end of each line, Shakespeare creates an opportunity for us to think up what comes next. And so we see here, I'm sorry, just want to check a little something. Sorry about that. Let me not to the marriage of true minds, what? Admit impediments. Love is not love, what? Which alters when it alteration finds. What else? Or bends with the remover to remove. Then what is it? No, it is an ever-fixed mark. What about it? That looks on tempest and is never shaken. What else? It is the star to every wandering bark. What about it? Whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. So at the end of each line of Shakespeare, there's a little moment to think what comes next. If you can make it through one line, ask yourself, what? And then say the next line, you're an actor. So if you ever find yourself at a wedding having to give this one, cover up the speech with a piece of paper, say one line, think what comes next, say it, think what comes next, say it. That's how phrasing Shakespeare one line at a time works. There are verbs in Shakespeare's language that are very, very important and expressive. Here they are in this poem: admit, alters, finds, bends, remove, loves, come, alters, bears, be, proved, writ, loved. That's where the energy of the language is located, in the verbs. There's antithesis, a lot of it in this, ideas that are opposed against each other. Love is not love. Finds, remove, that looks but is not shaken. I can see his worth, but I don't know his height. His worth is unknown, but his height is taken. Loves, not times, fool, love, time. And of course, at the end, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. So you want to circle the ideas that are opposite each other in Shakespeare and let those ideas carry you through the poem. Finally, the height of the language changes. It's not all blah, 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 blah poetry. Sometimes it's quite simple. And I want to look at that tonight in a little bit of a way having to do with the sound of the language itself. We've talked a little bit about that in our sessions together. But this is a very, very musical poem. And there's assonance. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, the repetition of verb sounds. Mark, star, bark. We hear that R, R, R sound repeating throughout the poem, this sort of musical texture there. Alliteration, repetition of S and Z sounds. Rosy lips, cheeks, sickles, compass, hours, weeks. And we hear a lot of S, R, S, R, R. Wonderful sort of musical, beautiful linguistic texture there. I said earlier I would talk about iambic pentameter. So here we have a line, oh no, it is an ever fixed mark. And I said fixed. Why? Because in order for it to scan as iambic pentameter, you need the ED. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark is only 9, and we're missing the 10th syllable. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark. Sounds weird. But if you say fixed, oh no, it is an ever fixed mark, it suddenly sounds beautiful and rhythmic. And so that's where those ED endings come from, because the scansion tells us we need it. Some editions, you'll see the little accent mark over the E in fixed. Then we have a line, it is the star to every wandering bark. Now that line, if you scan it, has too many syllables. It is the star to every wandering bark. Sounds weird. It is the star to every wandering bark. Too many syllables. So we take a syllable out of wandering and we say wandering. It is the star to every wandering bark. And then it's iambic pentameter, and it feels much more harmonious, satisfying, and euphonious. Whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken, that's called hypermetrical, extra meter. It's got an extra syllable, 11 instead of 10. Whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Right? And Hamlet, of course, says to be or not to be. That is the question, 11th syllable, but because it's unstressed, it doesn't throw off the rhythm. As opposed to, but bears it out into the edge of doom. Even though it's printed, even to the edge of doom, we actually say it with one syllable, but bears it out into the edge of doom. So there are strange changes that happen. And here in the couplet, even though we have ed endings, we don't pronounce them. If this be error and upon me proved, not proved. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ nor no man ever loved, right? We don't say that. We say proved, loved. So that's how scansion changes the sort of shape of some of these words in Shakespeare and gives the time signature, the syncopation, the jazziness to his poetry. A little bit more about rhythm. It's really formed in Shakespeare by syllables. Now this crazy colorful thing I've got here, you see impediments, alteration, and remover. Those are polysyllabic words. Impediments has 4 syllables. Alteration has 4 syllables. Remover 3. Then there are a bunch of 2-syllable words. Admit, alters, remove, tempests, unknown, although, rosy, compass, error, upon. But the vast bulk of this poem is 1-syllable words, monosyllabic words. Let me not to the, or bends with the, oh no, it is and. That looks on, it is the star too. And we hear this sort of relentless kind of slow, dramatic stress on these words that are monosyllabic. So one thing you want to look at in Shakespeare is how he plays with the number of syllables in words to arrange the rhythm of the language. Let me not to the marriage of true minds. So we have bump, 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 dee-dee, bump, bump. Admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. And you can hear just the number of syllables in the words creating a rhythm. It is the star to every wandering bark. Within his bending sickle's compass come. And here you have monosyllables at the beginning of the line, a monosyllable at the end of the line, and then polysyllables in the middle, and it creates this wonderful rhythmic tempo effect. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. And you can hear how the words with 2 syllables pop out amid this giant number of monosyllabic words. And that's how Shakespeare creates musicality. This sonnet has been set to music many, many, many times. And it's no surprise because it is so extremely musical. So I'm going to give you a chance now to apply what you've learned. It's June. You're going to go to a wedding. Maybe it'll be on Zoom. But you might have to read Sonnet 116. And in this moment of tumult, in this moment of crisis, in this moment of emergency, we can listen to Shakespeare tell us that love is constant. Love does not change. Here's Sonnet 116. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. So you can step on a glass now and shout Mazel Tov because they're married. And it's a pleasure to listen to that language. I feel better. I feel my heart lifted by the knowledge that 400 years ago, somebody wrote a poem about love's constancy that still speaks to me today. And it's a gift to have it in my life, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be able to share it with you. You can find me there, Hi Barry, at theoldglobe.org. I'd love to hear what's on your mind. And I'll reply, and thank you for being with us. And again, let us know what you think the globe can mean in the better America that we all wish to build. If you like what you heard tonight, please go to the Globe Rising page on the Old Globe's website. There you can make a contribution to keep the globe and its people intact until that happy day when we can reopen. Thanks everyone for joining me. Be brave. Don't panic. Be kind. Take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks so much for being with me tonight.